Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rob Rinder on Drive Time on Talk Radio. I'm going to be with you till 7 o'clock now. Some people think that I was born with a silver spoon in every conceivable orifice available, that I'm so posh that I sound like I've been mugged by a Mitford. In fact, some people say that I'm so posh that I make the Queen sound like she runs the Queen Vic in EastEnders. But the fact of the matter is that my dad is a very proud, or was a very proud, black London taxi driver. In fact, most of the time in my childhood, I remember, if you can't see me, so I'd turn around like this and he'd speak to me like this, go, see all I've had in the back of my cab. I'm afraid to say none of his skill set has passed down to me. I've got no sense of direction. I'm a terrible driver, and there's no way that I would pass the expert knowledge that is required of black cab drivers, who are the best and most skilled drivers, not just in, this country, but frankly in the world. It takes 3 years, sometimes more, the equivalent of a university degree, to become a black taxi driver, but they don't shout about it enough in my view. I travelled here in a black cab, and throughout the last year and a half, cabbies, of course, we forget, have been on the front line and worked tirelessly to get us to and from our work appointments and to hospitals and other essential journeys. Not just quickly and comfortably, but of course professionally. But of course the pandemic has seen tragic losses in that close-knit community, not least because they have been working in the middle of all of the horror. So London Taxi PR came up with the idea of the Orange Taxi Remembrance Ribbon, with money raised from the sale of ribbons going towards charities associated with the London taxi profession. And I'm very proud of this charity. I'm proud of being the son of a taxi driver. So here to tell us more are political figure Ms. Farah London and Andy Scott, PR and Com specialist for London Taxi PR. And I'm a big fan of Andy's because he goes out there and champions the work of the London black cab. And in my view, not enough people do that. First of all, I'm going to say hi, Farah. Hi, Andy. Tell us about the campaign and how we should and can all help.
Hi, good afternoon to you, Rob.
Hi, Rob. Nice to be here.
How are you doing, Farah?
Thanks for having us on. Much appreciated.
No. Thank you. First of all, tell us about the impact of COVID on the taxi community.
Yeah, so we came up with the idea of the Orange Taxi Remembrance Ribbons,
right?
Because we wanted to recognise those in the profession that we'd sadly lost during the pandemic. And we wanted it to be a symbol of recognition for the families, but also we wanted to do something to recognise those drivers that we'd lost, and also do something for the charities at the same time. So all the monies raised from the sale of these ribbons will go and be split equally between the respective taxi charities, and they're going to be made available from several green huts, taxi shelters throughout London as well.
Farah, how have you got involved with this campaign, the Orange Taxi Remembrance Ribbon?
I think it's so important, and I have to congratulate London Taxi PR for what they're doing, because unfortunately the profession has been forgotten during the pandemic. They have really suffered, and they haven't received any support from the government or the mayor's office. So I think this is an incredible initiative that they've launched to support the charities, to help people who are still suffering, even with mental illness. So I really support what they're doing, and I really hope that the government takes note and will start supporting the profession.
Well, I can see, we can barely hear you, but what I can see is I think you're at the launch of this now. That's why you're close together. We can barely hear it in the background. But just to be clear, people forget this. Like other self-employed individuals, there was no help at all for black taxi drivers. Whose businesses, especially under lockdown 1 and 2, their businesses were absolutely decimated. Many of them went out to do work which was, of course, dangerous. They were given very little financial assistance. And, the thing, Andy, that I shout about, and Farah, I hope you're aware of too, is just how little people know about the qualifications and qualities of our black taxi drivers, the hoops that they have to jump through. I mean, they have got sat-navs in their heads They do the equivalent of a
Yeah.
3, sometimes 4-year university degree to get that green badge. In
Exactly.
many instances during lockdown, they answered the call, they drove people to and from hospitals, and they paid the ultimate price as a result. But because
Yes.
they're a profession that doesn't have a singular organisation to look after them, there's no one union, because in my humble opinion, actually in my unhumble opinion, the Mayor's Office have done very little to protect them, to champion their work, or above all else to assist them during this horrible time. The reality is they're left out on their own. And it seems to me that this Orange Taxi Remembrance Ribbon is the least that some of us can do, especially now that they're facing competition from other taxi services, in inverted commas, many of which I won't mention on line here or on the radio, but that you know. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Well, London taxis are an iconic symbol of London. You know, and have been around in existence for over 365 years. Unfortunately, with some of the things that have been implemented throughout the pandemic, obviously the measures regarding temporary road closures and temporary bike lanes,
Right.
their job has been made even harder. So not only have they suffered from a lack of tourism in London and a lack of business generally through people not being in the office and through people not being out shopping as regularly as they would be, things have been made even harder. And with regards to access to the roads and streets that they've had throughout their entire lives as a business entity, these are slowly being evaporated and making their job even harder. And particularly for those people who have disabilities or mobility issues, they are the ones that are suffering, you know.
Yeah, and it's something very important also to mention that during the pandemic, the government was promoting to cycle, to use public transport. But, you know, the trade is part of TfL, and they did not promote how safe it is to use a taxi service. And that's very unfortunate. So that's why I think London Taxi Pl has done a phenomenal job promoting the profession through donations.
Thanks very much. Sadly, I could talk to you all day. Obviously, I've had to declare my very vested interest. I'm a third generation not taxi driver because I never would have passed knowledge. But my dad and my late papa, who died during COVID, was also a taxi driver. And you're absolutely right to remind us, Farah, that the taxi service is part of Transport for London. It's part of that service. Only it's the lost and the forgotten. And it's time we remembered them. And I will be wearing an Orange Taxi Remembrance Ribbon. You can get yours. Thank you for your excellent work remembering the work that they've done. Now, after the break, something entirely